I want to show you this photo of the first satellite image ever taken of Nevada's Lake Mead in 2000. I was there as a kid on a houseboat trip the summer before, and I vividly remember just how deep and dark blue the water was. Fast forward to 2022, and this is what the lake looked like when that same satellite image was taken. You can see just how much of it dried up. Approximately 5.2 trillion gallons, or 649 million gallons per day. And even though water levels have improved by a very small percentage over the last couple years, it's still by far below the average. You probably know that water scarcity is a pressing global issue, but the crisis in the American West feels eerily different, because it's not just about how much water there is or isn't. It's about who owns the rights to it.
In 2018, they were the wealthiest farmers in the country.
They say they only tap into it during dry years.
We established this water bank 20 years ago, and we did everything by the rules.
Who are these water barons, really? And how did the most precious resource we have become privatized, to the point where there are now more water rights in one state than actual water? To find out, I examined water rights in nearly every state in the Colorado River Basin and drove through a town that lost a portion of its water rights when a private company bought and sold them for millions. The Colorado River is literally right here, and for many in this area, the rights to use it are drying up. Before I started doing research for this video, I had no idea that
the biggest emerging market on earth is water infrastructure and water resources in America. It's a $1 trillion market opportunity.
Not only for those looking to profit from the shortage, but for the entrepreneurs who are trying to solve it.
It was pretty straightforward to say, like, hey, people need water. We can make it.
But will that be enough to bring water back to the American West?
Someday water's going to be more precious than gold, and people are going to kill each other to try to get that water.
Oh, hey, Con.
Right, sorry. But I'm going to have the water.
So check this out. This is a map of the Colorado River. As it flows from the Rockies to the Gulf of California, it branches off into a system of aqueducts that supply 7 states with the water they depend on to sustain agriculture and more than 40 million people. But determining who gets to use the water and exactly how much wasn't always so clear-cut. During the gold rush, some states had something called prior appropriation, which gave people the right to use water on a first-come, first-served basis. Under this system, the person who made beneficial use of the water established a permanent right to use it from that source. In other words, if you started using water from the Colorado River in 1900, you had priority access over someone who started using it a year later. But in the early 20th century, some state populations started growing much faster than others, which created a problem, according to water lawyer James Eklund. Because if a larger state like California had more people claiming access to the water, then other states, like Colorado, for example, would have eventually been out of priority. So in 1922, the 7 states in the Colorado River Basin divided themselves between the upper and lower basins and signed the Colorado River Compact, an agreement to split access to 15 million acre-feet of water, giving half to the upper basin states and half to the lower basin. For context, an acre-foot is about 326,000 gallons of water, or roughly half an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So multiply that by roughly 15 to 20 million, and you have, more or less, what the Colorado River was back in 1922. But that was 100 years ago. And even back then, they overestimated just how much water was actually in the river. Today, it's a lot more complex because the Colorado is now flowing at historic lows. And since the agreement, states in the lower basin have pulled more than their agreed upon share, especially California, my home state. There are, of course, other factors contributing to the river's critical condition. The evaporation of its reservoirs, like Lake Mead, is one of them. But nothing compares to the impact of human consumption and demand, primarily for agriculture. About 51% of the river goes to crops and livestock in the upper and lower basins. And the people who own those farmlands are critical to this story. And here's why. The 2025 LA wildfires sparked a heated conversation about Southern California's water supply and resources. Within days, people started pointing fingers at the Resnicks, the billionaire couple behind the wonderful company.
They're one of the largest farm owners in America, and they do $4 billion a year in revenue.
The wonderful company farms and owns more than 140,000 acres, most of which are in California, that produce some familiar products. Naturally, they need a lot of water to irrigate that land, especially the almonds. Just one California almond requires an average of 3.2 gallons, according to Science Direct. The wonderful company, through a spokesperson, said that in the early 90s, Stuart Resnick was approached by a group of water districts to help buy a water bank that the state planned to shut down. In exchange for giving up some state water deliveries, the Resnicks and those stakeholders were successful in acquiring the Kern Water Bank, the largest water bank in Kern County, located 150 miles north of Los Angeles. Today, the Resnicks hold a 57% stake. According to the wonderful company, there is zero truth that any individual or company, much less ours, owns or controls most of the water in California. Contrary to conspiracy theories that resurfaced during the LA wildfires, wrongly accusing the couple of hoarding water, which has been disproved by multiple news outlets, the Resnicks don't own the water itself. The state owns the actual resource, but they do own the water rights. Water rights are incredibly complex, and they also vary from state to state, so it's hard to talk about them in general terms. But in the simplest terms, they're legal permissions to use water from a specific source. In the Western US, there are two primary water rights doctrines. The first one is that prior appropriation doctrine I mentioned earlier, and a second called the riparian doctrine, which grants landowners the reasonable and beneficial use of water from an adjacent source. California recognizes both systems, but most other Western states primarily follow prior appropriation. Prior appropriation laws allow individual water rights to be bought and sold like any piece of property. For example, I might not own the water in this glass, but let's say I own a percentage of the glass itself, which allows me to consume that exact percentage of the water. And if I wanted to, I could sell those permissions to someone else. However, the process itself can be incredibly costly and challenging due to legal and environmental red tape. But private institutions and investment firms have a workaround, and it looks like this. This is Cibola, Arizona, one of the many rural communities that depends on the Colorado River, and that I happen to be driving through right now. Nearly a decade ago, a private company called Greenstone Resource Partners, LLC, bought nearly 500 acres of agricultural land in Cibola. Prior appropriation allows water rights to also be inherited. So Greenstone gained all the water rights the 500 acres had to the Colorado River just by acquiring the land. Then, in 2022, it sold those rights for $24 million to a growing suburb of Phoenix, about 200 miles away. The firm's gross profit from the sale was $14 million. As you can imagine, this sparked intense criticism and a local uproar here. Because while Greenstone does have ties to Arizona, it's actually backed by East Coast investors, according to multiple sources. And this type of outsider land grab in the West seems to be a growing trend. A New York-based investment firm called Water Asset Management owns at least 3,000 acres in western Colorado's Grand Valley. Harvard University has also quietly amassed over $300 million worth of California vineyards. And yes, just like Cibola, all of that land comes with water rights, which on their own can be worth millions of dollars. Add land to the equation, and you're looking at millions more.
Land tied to water is the most profitable investment you could possibly make.
And that's why these billionaires are essentially becoming farmers.
Obviously, these farms always have bulletproof water rights, and in an environment where climate change is impacting water supply, those farms, just as farms, become more valuable.
When I covered the California Forever project last year, which proposes building a new city on 60,000 acres of land in Solano County, California, I learned the land itself could be worth 10 times what investors paid for it if they just got it rezoned for residential development. That still has yet to happen, but what those investors do own along with the land are its water rights. According to CBS News, California Forever intends to buy more water rights from outside of Solano County if the new city gets approved. It's hard to put an exact price on water rights because the value of water itself fluctuates so much. Similar to real estate, buyers typically view them as long-term investments that will appreciate over time. But for the investors acquiring land and water rights for development purposes, like California Forever, there's a problem. There are now more water rights than actual water in California and in the Colorado River Basin. Water that exists in legal documents rather than in the real world is known as paper water. And according to the California Water Impact Network, it's a ticking time bomb. And when it explodes, it will be a catastrophe. Remember how I said it takes about 3 gallons of water to grow just one California almond? What if we didn't need to pull that water from one of our critical natural sources? What if, even in times of drought, we could just rely on the weather? That question led me here to El Segundo, California, aka The Gundo, to chat with Augustus Dorico, the founder and CEO of Rainmaker, a startup that's in the business of modifying the weather through cloud seed engineering.
Cloud seeding is just changing the amount of water that falls onto the ground. Really simply put, some clouds have liquid water in them that is cold, but the droplets are too small to naturally precipitate, and they don't freeze together because it's not cold enough. What we can do is measure how much of that liquid water is in a cloud with radar, with probes, fly a drone up into it, spray a mineral that has a crystal structure identical to ice. The water freezes onto it, so the droplets freeze onto those crystals, become big enough, heavy enough snowflakes such that they fall. And if it's warm beneath the cloud, they melt into rain, and if it's cold beneath the cloud, they stay as snow.
Dorico dropped out of college in 2022 and started Rainmaker in 2023. Since then, he's raised a $6.3 million seed round, including an angel investment from Y Combinator president and CEO Gary Tan.
In a mad dash, starting in October of 2024 and finishing at the beginning of December, we designed, prototyped, and then built like 60 of these. And then for the sake of getting something bigger that could carry more payload, that could stay in cloud much longer, we had to engineer this version.
You're not a first-time founder, but you are a young founder. How did you effectively sell yourself and the value prop?
One thing that was pretty different about Rainmaker.
If you want to hear Augustus answer that question, plus a lot more, like why he dropped out of UC Berkeley, how he became one of the Gundo's most notable founders, and his tips for launching a company in an evolving market with huge potential, then click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to access the full conversation. Okay, back to the Gundo. Bye. When I say 2050, like without Rainmaker, what immediately comes to mind for you?
Famine around the world from the crops in the Central Valley collapsing, depopulation of the American West in cities like Salt Lake, Las Vegas, Phoenix, the loaded cost that people don't think about too, like, you know, if a banana or if a orange costs $1 versus $10, the downstream effects on everybody's purchasing power is affected meaningfully as well. So the ripples in the economy that come from this like fundamental thing that we never really think about, which is water and water access, are huge.
How will you know that you've made it?
The American West will be green. All of the land between Texas and California will be arable and more biodiverse and have more life in it than ever before. That is the big one.
Water has and always will be valuable, but in our changing climate, it's becoming more precious than oil. The Kern Water Bank can hold up to 740,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. According to a Forbes estimate from 2021, the Resnicks stake could be worth up to $1.7 billion, depending on the day. The question is no longer will there be enough water for everyone. It's who gets it and who profits. In the words of Ben Franklin, when the well's dry, we know the worth of water. Subscribe to The Hustle for more billionaire stories like this, and check out my video on a group of billionaires that's taking control of a mountain range in southern Montana. Oh, and don't forget to watch my full conversation with Augustus Dorico by clicking the link in the description or by scanning the QR code.